Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and get started for the evening. Thank you so much to everyone who is joining us live or whether you're watching this recording. We're glad that you're here. My name is Sarah Griesdorf, and I am the founder of Whole Debt, and we're building a community for college-aged and recent grad women as you transition to adulthood. Tonight, that extends to anyone that is in the audience. If you're joining us for tonight's event, I encourage you to use the hashtag finances with Whole Debt, and you can tag us at Whole Debt on every social media platform, including our budding presence on TikTok. I encourage you to follow Whole Debt on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram and TikTok to stay in the loop about all of our upcoming events. And I can already tell you our next one will be on March 25th at 8 p.m. EST on building relationships with your manager and your coworkers. So we are so excited to have our awesome panelists here tonight. We're joined by Taylor Price, the founder of Tap Into It, and Ariel Fortunato and Hannah Tufts from Brown Advisory. I'm going to go ahead and give them a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into our content for the evening. Taylor, can you start us off?
Hey everybody, my name is Taylor, also known as @PricesTay on social media. Like Sarah said, I'm the founder of Tap Into It, which is a financial literacy company specifically for Gen Z. And like I said, I create content on the side.
Awesome. Ariel?
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel Fortunato. I'm a certified financial planner with Brown Advisory. I work with individuals and families and help them plan for their financial futures, make sure they haven't missed anything, make sure they're taking advantage of different opportunities and thinking about what risks could possibly veer them off track. Really happy to be here with you all tonight.
Thanks. And Hannah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Tufts, and I'm a certified financial planner, and I work at Brown Advisory with Ariel, and we help families put together financial plans for their future and really enjoy working with next-gen clients who are currently building their wealth. So really excited to be with you all tonight.
Awesome. And we're so excited to be able to have all of you joining us. So to kick things off, Ariel and Hannah are going to walk us through a presentation covering things like budgeting, credit scores, and retirement plans. I personally am so excited to get to take some notes and learn for myself. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you all.
Thank you. I will start sharing my screen. Okay, perfect. So, as Sarah mentioned, we have a presentation to go through together tonight, but we are not married to this presentation. So we just wanted to put together some slides that will help contextualize some of the concepts we're talking about. But if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can get to them at the end. But to give a brief overview, as Sarah mentioned, we're going to talk about budgeting, credit and debt, retirement planning, and then we'll have an opportunity for some questions. So to jump right into it, we thought it would be fun to kick off tonight with a little quiz. You're not going to get graded and you don't have to share your responses, but it's a helpful way to kind of help you figure out where you are on your journey to financial wellness. So do you know what you spend on a monthly or annual basis? Do you know the difference between gross and net earnings? Do you know what your car insurance costs each month? Do you have an idea of what you spend on coffee, dining out, shopping, or concert tickets in a non-COVID world? Do you know when taxes are due each year? And do you know why you need a good credit score? So in going through this quiz, we just wanted to demonstrate that your financial wellness is multifaceted. So while you may know the ins and outs of your spending habits, it's also important to be aware of why you need a good credit score and what your credit score actually is. So as I mentioned, the term financial wellness, we like to think about it in the context of different pillars. So pillars 1 and 2 are probably pretty important to you right now, setting clear goals and understanding your current financial state. So understanding what your assets are and your liabilities. So your assets could be your checking or your savings account, where liabilities could be your student loan debt. Also, if you recently entered the workforce, disability insurance, understanding if your employer offers health insurance and what their coverage options are. So reviewing your insurance plan and protecting for and against those risks could be really important to you right now too. But our point in sharing all of these different pillars is that they're all integrated and connected. And sometimes as you move through your life, you're going to spend a little bit more time on other pillars or focus on some more than others. So for example, if you start having children in the future, you want to spend more time on your estate plan because that's more important to name guardians for your children, stuff like that. But right now, tonight, we're going to focus on a few of these, and I'll touch on budgeting next, which ties into pillar number 2. So you've probably also heard the term financial planning and budgeting. And the difference, some people can confuse them. So I just wanted to be clear that financial planning is a financial plan. It's going to be a robust analysis that looks at where you are today and where you want to go in the future, and then create actionable steps for you to get there. Where a budget is one piece of a full financial plan. So a budget's going to take a look at where you are, a moment in time, it's static, and looks at your spending. So if you're not sure how to build a budget, we'll go over that next. And we like to say you just have to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and come face to face with where your money is going. So take a look at your recurring debt, look at your recurring bills, and take a look at your discretionary spending. So any recurring bills would be such things as rent, car insurance payment, your Netflix subscription, anything that happens every month is a recurring bill. And then if you have any debt, so any existing credit card debt paying off, you should be making payments on that. If you have student loan debt, and then discretionary spendings, your fun, entertainment, travel budget. And then the next step would be to really defining your needs, wants, and priorities. So when you look at these bills, it's really helpful to have more than 1 month of data, maybe 3 or even a year, since last year was kind of a different spending year probably, to really get an idea of where you're spending, where your money's going. And from there, you can say, okay, these are my needs, and then you can define your needs a little bit further. So maybe anything that keeps a roof over your head, food on the table, and the lights on is going to be a need. But if your SoulCycle classes are really important to you, that might be a need for you, but for me, it would maybe be a want. So you really need to be honest with yourself and understand, or maybe challenge yourself and think about it as whether or not you would pay for it if you lost your job or your resources changed or you had a finite amount of money. Would that really still be a need? Or maybe, and if the answer is no, then it would be in your want category. And then lastly, setting goals for yourself. We want to help you take action today to accomplish those goals. So setting goals helps you to be more intentional. So if you want to travel to Europe next summer, saving up for spending money would be a short-term goal. Another short-term goal you might have could be setting up an emergency fund. So if you're not familiar with an emergency fund, we would recommend having a savings account or money set aside to tap in case of an emergency, or some people call it a rainy day fund. But having 3 to 6 months of your fixed expenses saved away there, just in case of an emergency. But working towards a healthy emergency fund could be a short-term goal. Whereas a medium or longer term goal, medium could be starting a business, or if you want to go back to school, you want to go to grad school, saving up for that could be a medium term goal. Whereas one long-term goal that we all have in common is saving for retirement. So Ariel will touch on different vehicles for that in a little bit. But so once you have kind of looked at where your spending is, you should start tracking it. So we can touch on some different strategies for tracking. Tracking is also really important because it helps you make informed goals. So if you understand what your needs are, then you can realize, you can make an informed goal of, okay, I can save this towards my priorities. And out of all these different ways, my best advice is to pick away and stick to it. So you might be familiar with Mint.com or other apps out there that help you track your spending. Those are all great. I personally use Mint, but I do get some complaints from people that it miscategorizes expenses and it's kind of stiff to use. But the longer you use Mint, the better the data comes out. So if you take time to teach it, it will provide good information. So for example, if you go to CVS and you buy shampoo, it'll probably categorize that as healthcare. But if you log into the app and just recategorize it from then on, it should recategorize it for you. You can also review your paper credit card statement if you like paper, old school with some highlighters, and just highlight your needs and your wants. You could also build a spreadsheet. If you like cash, you could use the envelope method. So at the beginning of the month, you could pull out $200 and write on it dining out. And once you've spent that $200, you're done dining out for the month. You could also adopt the pay yourself first mentality. This page kind of goes into detail about what I mean by pay yourself first. But so at the top, you have your net employment income, which would be net meaning after taxes, after 401k contributions. If you have a side hustle for other income, you have an Etsy shop, or you drive for Uber or something like that, that's your income. And then right below that, you have your needs bucket or your expenses. And so once you've taken care of your needs, you have that leftover amount in orange. And that you can use that to make progress toward your goals. So from there, you can figure out how much you want to be saving towards your priorities. So this method would let you take progress towards reaching your goals. And then once you fulfill your priorities buckets, you can move on to your wants, and you can kind of have guilt-free spending. So this allows you, rather than fulfilling your wants first and then trying to make progress towards your goals, you're being actionable and you're taking progress towards filling those priority buckets first. So what you can also do is, underneath that 3-bucket approach, needs, wants, and priorities, you can drill down a little bit deeper and break out all of your priorities into different buckets. So if you have a goal of saving $10,000 for an emergency fund, $3,000 towards travel, and $10,000 towards a car purchase, you can break that out over time and understand, okay, I want to save $100 a month towards my car purchase. I'll reach my car purchase in this amount of time. Whereas if you want to reach your goals faster, you can revisit your entire budget. Maybe you can make more income, maybe not. Can you reduce any spending on your needs or your wants? Maybe, maybe not. But you can set the pace for how quickly or slowly you fill these buckets. And at the end of the day, tracking your spending and doing any of these using any of these methods, at the end of the day, it really makes you accountable to you. So with that, I'll pass it over to Ariel to talk about credit.
Thanks, Hannah. So I know that talking about credit at 8 o'clock at night on a Monday is not the most exciting topic, but hear me out, because anytime we talk about financial fundamentals, no one asks to talk about credit scores, but whenever we talk about it, we get so many questions. And I think it's because it's a piece of your finances that is so important and so misunderstood. And it's something that you're graded on as soon as you turn 18 without really having the tools to handle it appropriately. So I wanted to spend a few minutes walking through what a credit score is and how it's calculated to the extent that that's helpful. So what is a credit score? It's a measure of how likely you are to pay your bills, whether it be repaying a loan, paying a lease for an apartment, whatever it may be. It's a measure of your credit worthiness. You can think of it kind of like a GPA. So it's a point in time, it's a measurement of past behavior that is possibly indicative of future behavior, right? So when you apply for college and you use your GPA, the college is saying, well, if you've been a good student, you'll probably continue to be a good student, so we want you. It's the same with a credit score. If you've demonstrated good behavior to date, you're more likely to get credit and lending and whatever else you may need because you've demonstrated you can handle it appropriately. The credit report is like a transcript. So it's all the supporting data that leads to the calculation of your score. So both of these change over time. The GPA, kind of GPA credit score will change depending on different activity that you have. So it's something that you want to make sure you're checking in on frequently. And one question that we get a lot is, well, if I don't have any use for debt, why does a credit score matter? And you know, universally having a healthy credit score is really important. If you are applying for a job, your employer may check your credit. If you're applying for an apartment, your landlord will likely check your credit. And then certainly if you ever want to buy a house buy a car, anything that needs financing, you will definitely have your credit run. And even if you have unlimited resources, sometimes debt actually has a place in the plan because it can be strategic. So it makes a lot of sense to have a healthy score. It's measured by 3 different credit bureaus. They're highlighted in blue there: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. So it's likely that you may have a slightly different score on each of those bureaus, but there should not be major discrepancies. If we go to the next page, thanks, Hannah. So what makes up a credit score? So the big blue bar there, that's your payment history. So that's how many of your past payments have you made on time. You want 99 to 100% of your payments to be made on time. If you have a delinquent payment or you make a payment late, it can stay on your credit report for up to 7 years. That's really, really important. If you miss a payment, don't panic, but call your provider. We're all human. Call your credit card company, call your student loan company and say, I missed a payment. Is there a grace period? Is there any way that you can not report it to the credit agency if I make the payment right now? Usually there's a lag between them collecting your payment and reporting the missed payment to the credit agency. So when in doubt, be proactive and be communicative if you've made a mistake. The orange piece is credit utilization. So of your available credit, how much have you utilized? And this pertains to revolving credit, so mostly credit cards. So if you have an Amazon credit card that has a limit of $1,000 and you make a purchase that's $500, that means your utilization ratio is 50%. You want ideally a credit utilization ratio to be 30% or below to have a healthy credit score. And it's cumulative across all of your credit cards. So if you have multiple credit cards, you want the cumulative balance to be less than 30% of the cumulative available limit. If you use your card, so you have the Amazon card, you spend $500, but you pay it off before your cycle runs, your utilization ratio will be 0. And that is an optimal way to use a credit card. So the credit bureau looks for 30% or less, but ideally it's 0, because any balance that hits your statement that gets carried on to the next month, you're going to pay interest on, and usually really high interest. So a good rule of thumb is charge only what you can afford to pay down, and that's a really responsible use of credit. The length of credit history, the green, is just something you're kind of penalized on when you're younger. So the length of credit history is an average of all of your loans and lines of credit and credit cards. So if you open up a credit card when you're 18 and you're 30 and you open up another credit card, your average length of history is 6. And if you close the credit card from when you're 18, now your length of credit is 0. So you want to be really mindful of this when you're applying for new lines of credit or when you're closing lines of credit. That tends to it's only 15% of your score. It tends to improve over time. Don't lose sleep over it, but be mindful of it when you make decisions around new credit activity. Which brings me to the yellow, new credit. So new credit is how many inquiries you have on your credit score. So new inquiries, which would be running your credit, applying for a card, for a loan, etc., having a landlord run your credit, those stay on your report for 2 years. And if you have too many of those inquiries, it starts to look desperate to the credit bureaus, so they ding you. So an example would be you graduate from college, you move out of the city to somewhere where you now need a car, so you apply for a car loan, you get a new apartment, you apply for a landlord, your employer checks your credit, and then all of a sudden your score starts to dip by a few points. It's okay, but just keep that in mind. I think the biggest takeaway is when you're at those kind of points of sale, and they say, do you want to open up a such and such credit card and save 20%? Don't do that just to save 20%. Maybe if you take a step back and think about it, there may be other merits to opening up that type of card. There might be other benefits. You may really use it and value it, but don't make a point of sale decision because it will have rippling effects on your credit score. And then credit mix is the variety of loans and lines of credit that you have. So student loans, mortgage debt, car loans, credit cards. The more lines of credit and kind of variety is actually good. So the more the better, which may not make financial sense, but it makes credit sense. So all kind of holistically, those pieces are combined as how your score is calculated, which can be surprising to some people. The ranges of credit scores, they vary slightly by bureau, but you really want to be kind of in the 700s, 800s. You want to have a good or excellent score. If you're good and have healthy credit behaviors, you'll get to excellent. Just give it some time. It might be your credit history pulling you down. It might be you don't have a good credit mix. It just takes a little time. But if your on-time payments are 100% and if your utilization ratio is healthy, the rest of the pieces will get there. So don't lose sleep over it. Really focus on those two components in the beginning and work towards that kind of green zone on the screen right now. And then best practices, as we talked about, pay your balance in full each month. High interest debt, it's going to pull down your score if you have a utilization ratio. If you can't do that, at least pay the minimum payments and make sure that they're made on time, and be communicative and proactive if you can't do that. Use a source like Credit Karma to check your score. Credit Karma is free. You can use it as much as you want. It won't impact your score to check it. And then you can run your credit report annually at each of the 3 bureaus. And the point of being vigilant on Credit Karma or on your full credit bureau is to make sure there's no errors or omissions or identity fraud or anything like that. You want to be really, really vigilant and just make sure that you know what activity is being reported and make sure that it's your activity and that no one has kind of hacked your social security number. We talked about keeping credit applications to a minimum, that kind of point of sale piece, and don't automatically close old credit cards just because you're not using them. So certainly if there's a fee, if you're paying an annual fee for a card and never using it, it might make sense to close it, but just give it a little thought. Pause before you close them. If you have a 0-fee credit card that's been around from, 2000, from your when you were 18, 19 in college, it might be worth just charging a dinner to it once every quarter to keep it active. And then here are some questions to think about whenever you apply. I'm sure many of you have already experienced this. When you apply for a credit card, when you sign off for a loan, there's tons and tons of paperwork. So these are the relevant things you want to pull out. What's the limit? What's the fee? What's the interest rate? What are penalties if you miss a payment? Is there a grace period, et cetera? You want to just be an informed consumer. So these are the important things to question when you're going through and kind of signing your life away and initialing a million times. These are the things you want to pay attention to. Okay, so with that, let's move on to retirement planning. So this slide is a call to action to start saving for retirement if you have not already. So the power of compounding, if you are not familiar, is basically, it's as simple as this. If you invest $100 and you earn 5%, at the end of the year, you have $105. You put in 100, you made 5. The next year, you now have $105 to invest, and you still earn 5%, but instead of earning $5, you earn $5.25. So each year, your interest starts to earn you interest, and cumulatively over time, that compounding effect is really, really meaningful. So to demonstrate that, we provided an example here. There's a lot of numbers on your screen, so I'm just going to share what to pay attention to. What you're looking at is if you assume you start investing at different points in your life. So if you took it the top row, you start investing at age 25, and you put in $4,600 a year, every year until you reach age 65, so 40 years. You will have put in $187,000, but at age 65, the balance will be $1 million. So over $800,000 of growth, or kind of money that your money has earned you. If you wait only 10 years to start at age 35, contribute the same amount, but for 30 years instead of 40, you end up with less than half. So you can see total contributions are, only 40 grand less, 50 grand less, but the estimated growth has been really cut. So there's a big benefit of starting when you're young, and it's really necessary because the retirement structure has shifted. So there's not as many pensions, Social Security, it's a long way away. No one really knows confidently what that may look like in the future. So we really need to self-fund our own retirements, which is a daunting task, but the one thing on our side is time. So the best thing you can do, the only free lunch in finance, is time and your ability to compound your contributions over time. So that is the biggest thing that we can share with you, and hopefully a helpful action item is to really start focusing on this when you're young and can take advantage of that compounding growth. How do you do it? So how do you save for retirement? What we're talking about here are specifically retirement plans, which means there's some type of tax advantage. You can save in many different vehicles, and we encourage you to. But what we're looking at specifically right now are retirement plans. So the first class of retirement plans are called employer-sponsored plans. So something like a 401k, which is kind of a buzzword. I feel like everyone has heard 401k, but maybe doesn't exactly know what that means. I remember signing up for my first 401k after graduating from college, and even with a finance degree, felt a little like I'm not sure what to do here. So you're in good company. But a 401k, and 401k, just as a fun fact, is the tax code the plan is based off of. That's it. So in a 401k, it's something that your employer has to offer you. So it has to be made available to you. You put your money in pre-tax, so you're kind of deferring a part of your income. So if you make $50,000 and you put $5,000 into a 401k over the course of the year, you're saying, give me $45,000 now and defer $5,000 for later. And you do that with the hope that the $5,000 will be invested and grow over time and be worth much more in the future. So you don't pay taxes on the $5,000 now. It grows tax deferred. And then in retirement, when you take it out, it's taxed as ordinary income. So every dollar that comes out of it after you reach retirement age will come back to you as taxable income. In a Roth 401k, it's similar in that you're deferring. So you're saying, pay me later with this $5,000, but you're saying, tax me on it now. So I'm only going to take $45,000, but tax me as though I received $50,000. And what that means is the $5,000 goes into the Roth 401k, grows tax-free, and comes out tax-free. So Hannah, if you flip to the page just one prior with the chart on the compounding, in the 25 example, if this is in a Roth 401k, $800,000 is tax-free. That's huge. That's a lot of free money. So that's where the Roth 401k can be really powerful. And the reason why it's a benefit is because your employer has to stay compliant with different IRS regulations. So there's a lot of record keeping and administration that goes into that account. So not all employers offer it, nor do they have to. So if they do, it's a benefit. If you flip back, Hannah, maybe go to the IRA page. If you don't have a 401k available to you, or if you do, but you want to contribute in excess of what you can put into that account, you can find an IRA, or which stands for individual retirement account. These are also governed by the IRS, but you do not need an employer to set this up. So traditional IRA works similar to a traditional 401k. You put money in, it'll grow tax deferred, and it'll come out tax-free as taxable income to you in retirement, and the Roth is the flip. So the words traditional and Roth don't change, those definitions don't change. It's just the vehicle and who makes it available to you, what platform you have to use, and what the funding limits are. That's really the distinction between the employer plan and the IRA. There's some other modest differences, but you can think of that as being the kind of big distinction. The contribution limit for IRAs in 2020 and 2021 is $6,000 per year. The Roth IRA, you stop being eligible to contribute to that directly once you reach a certain level of income. You can always contribute to the traditional as long as you have what's known as earned income. So earned income is W-2 income, 1099 income, money that you went out and earned, as opposed to money that your investments threw off by that kind of compounding interest phenomenon. So there's a lot of jargon on this page, but hopefully that's kind of helpful just structurally. Employer-sponsored versus IRA, they're not mutually exclusive. You can do both, but certainly you would want to start with the employer plan if one's available to you, especially if they match your contributions. So a match is basically, if you put in 5%, we'll give you 5%. And that's free money as long as you stay with the company for X amount of years. So that's a good place to start because you double your money quite instantly. And then how much should you be saving? As much as you can. Start early, save often. If you have a 401k available to you and there's a match, start with contributing at least enough to make that full match. If not, you're leaving money on the table. So you want to start there. And then beyond that, it really becomes a decision for you and how you manage student loan payments, building your emergency fund, starting to save for retirement. There's a lot of demands for your money, right? So it's good enough to start with meeting your match. And then each year, when you hopefully make more money, if you get a raise, if you get a bonus, if you switch jobs and make more money, just bump up your percentage by 1%. And then over time, you want to creep up to kind of 12 to 15% of your income going into retirement savings each year. That's a good rule of thumb. Different for everybody, but that's a good thing to aspire to over time. So I think that's the last slide, Hannah. So I will stop talking, even though I could talk about this for an unlimited amount of time, and kick it back to Sarah to see if there are any questions.
Awesome. Yeah, we actually have a bunch of questions. So we'd love to get through as many of those as we can. Why don't we keep sharing the screen in case there's a slide that we want to go back and reference. So to start things off, we had a question from Abby. I'm just going to read them directly so I make sure I don't misconstrue them. Is it bad if you don't have a credit score? When is a good time to start building your credit?
I love this question. It's not bad. Get started. I think now is the time. You're judged on it as soon as you turn 18. So it's a good time to focus on it. If you have no credit at all, there are ways that you can start to build credit. There are things known as credit building loans. There are things called secured credit cards. Secured credit card is basically you make a deposit. So you give a bank $500 and they give you a card and you use it with a $500 limit. For a year or so until you've proven that you can manage that limit responsibly, then they return your money and you can use a normal card. So there is kind of a barrier to entry, right? When you have no credit, how do you get approved for something? So there are a couple of solutions out there to help you build credit. You could also see, depending on your family situation, if a parent wants to add you as a co-signer, because then you would have their credit, the benefit of their credit history, which could strengthen your score.
Awesome.
Great question.
Question from Fiona. She says, I have 2 credit cards with good credit scores. My partner and I also have another card we use to split purchases, but the credit card is under his name. Do you think this will hurt my credit score over time?
Hannah, do you want to jump in or do you want me to take it? So, I mean, will it hurt her score over time? I mean, I think the worst part is if that card is being paid responsibly and used responsibly, she won't benefit from it. But it won't negatively impact you. On the flip side, if it's not managed responsibly, it could negatively impact your partner. So I think I would say if the plan is to keep that structure, just make sure the cards that are in your name are also being utilized and utilized responsibly so that you can continue to build your own credit.
Perfect. Question from Annie. If you have an authorized credit card with your parents, does it affect your credit score? And then also she says, also this presentation is amazing.
Well, thank you. And also I'm smiling because I told you we would get credit questions, even though no one wants to talk about credit. It's so important. So if you are an authorized signer on your parents' credit card, I think was the question, you will have the benefit of their credit history. So it will impact your score. And that's why on the flip side, if you choose to miss a payment, it will negatively impact your parents' score. You're kind of all unified in the activity for that card. But it's a nice, easy way to start to build credit is to kind of borrow what your parents have been doing with that card and get that benefit. So it will impact your score.
Awesome. Interesting question from Mackenzie, who I know is involved in the cryptocurrency space. I don't know if Taylor has any thoughts on this either, but Mackenzie says, to account for inflation potentially diminishing the value of currencies, do you think it's good to invest in more secure assets like land, gold, or Bitcoin? And she says, and what age should we start? If you have any thoughts on that.
I'm happy to start, and I would love for others to jump in because we may all have different perspectives on this. But I think just generally speaking, if you take a step back, don't be married to one asset class in general. Kind of what the question's hinting at is the value of diversification. So who knows what's going to happen with inflation? Who knows what's going to happen with the stock market? Who knows what will happen with bonds, fixed income, which are, indicative of what's going on in the economy, which is indicative of who's in administration. Like there's just so many what ifs. So instead of putting all your eggs into one basket, diversify. And it's smart to have some land. It's smart to have some crypto if you're comfortable with the risk. It's smart to have some in the broader kind of stock market. It's smart to have some in cash. You know, not a ton, you're not going to earn anything, but that's what's there for you. If you lose a job, that's how you're going to pay your rent. So it's smart to have the kind of diversification in place so that if there is some type of characteristic that makes one asset class less attractive, it won't sink your whole portfolio, and hopefully the others are doing well enough to balance that, especially if those different assets are not correlated, right? So if they operate differently, that's the best way to build a holistic portfolio, which I realize is kind of a jargony answer, but that's really how we think about it. Have I missed anything, Hannah and Taylor, that you would add?
Awesome. Okay, and then question from Nikki. She said, my mom said she built houses with credit cards because of all the benefits. So which credit cards / companies would you recommend opening?
Ooh, gosh. So it depends. I love the idea of using benefits. I think you want to first go to Credit Karma. I don't work for Credit Karma, to be clear. I just find them to be really user-friendly. So go to Credit Karma, and there's they simulate kind of what different cards you have good odds of being approved for based on your score. So you don't want to apply for a card that you don't really have a good shot of getting approved for, because that doesn't look good for your credit either. So you can kind of see what cards you may be eligible for. Between Credit Karma and NerdWallet, there's a number of different rankings out there: best cards for travel, best cards for points, best cards for whatever it may be. I would say just be mindful that those sources, when they're ranking, usually take money. They're usually ads. So maybe don't pay attention to the ranking 1 to 10, but the information is good information. So you can compare fees, costs, approval odds, things like that, and find one that works well for you. And I agree with your mom. I think they're a great way to build some points. If you're going to spend the money anyways and you have the ability to pay it off responsibly, why not get some points? Awesome.
The questions keep coming in, so I'm going to make sure we leave time for Taylor, but we have at least 2 more here that I think we can get through for starters, and we can take more at the end. Another question from Fiona. Do you have any recommendations for ways to save money on taxes for individuals in a high income tax bracket?
You want me to jump in, Hannah? So I think this is an overused line, but you don't want the tax tail to wag the dog, right? Like, you want to make sure whatever action you're taking is an action that you actually want to take, not just one that's going to save you tax money, unless that is your primary objective. But I mean, 2 immediate things come to mind. One would be really making sure that you're maxing out your employer retirement plan if you have the ability to do that. If you do traditional 401k, then you can up to $19,500 of your annual money is not taxable to you in that current year. If you have philanthropic objectives, if you're charitably inclined, you could do something called a donor advised fund, which enables you to kind of bunch a charitable deduction into one tax year. So if you have a tax year where you have a really big bonus or something really positive has happened that may be unique, hopefully not, but might be unique, you can use a donor advised fund to make a charitable deduction in the year where it's most meaningful to you, but you don't have to pay all of the money out to charities immediately. So if you're not ready to give $20,000 to one charity, you don't have to. You can take the deduction and then pay it out to charities over time. Fidelity Charitable has a great donor advised fund, so if that's interesting to you, you can Google Fidelity Charitable and they have a video about how they work.
Awesome. And then the last question we have for now is from Claire, and I think we might have already touched on it, but see if you have anything else to add. Claire just said, do you have any suggestions in general for those of us who are applying for our first credit card?
Check your credit score. Figure out what type of card are you looking for? Do you want a credit card just to build credit? Because if so, then I would pick one that has a really low fee, a modest limit, not one that's too high that's going to cause you to spend more than you should, and one that you feel like you have a good user experience. Like if you're someone that needs an in-person bank, make sure you go with like a JP Morgan or Schwab or something like that. If you're someone that's comfortable with online only, great, but just be clear about how you want to get in touch with people if there's a question. But I think you should be fee sensitive if the goal is to just build credit in the beginning.
Awesome. Yeah, I had a card that made sense when I was at home, and then went to Boston University. We like only have Bank of America, so I switched over for the ease. So I know we have a lot of folks who are in college, and I would just maybe think about what branches are near you. This is so awesome, Ariel and Hannah, and we might have some more questions at the end, so I will tap you. But Hannah, you can go ahead and stop sharing your screen. Perfect. And Taylor, I have some questions. We're going to talk all about investing. I'm so excited, mostly because I invested in AMC the other week and I don't want to talk about it. All right. So to kick things off, let's just start like basic, simple steps that you think that post-grad folks can take when starting to invest their money, especially when you're on a starting salary and want to get the most bang for your buck.
So I first off think it's super, super important to kind of go back what Ariel and Hannah said was that basically I like to call this concept of this money tree. And so you need to have a proper, emergency fund as your roots for this tree. You need to have your seed of budgeting. And from there, your tree can really start to grow. And if you're post grad, most likely your primary source of income is going to be that trunk of the tree. Anything on top might be something like investing. And so when we're really thinking about investing, number one, the Roth IRA is something that I personally love. I make maximum contributions to, which I believe in 2021 is $6,000. And I also create a high dividend yield portfolio as well too for the stock market.
Awesome. Love that reiteration of everything that we just talked about. Don't want to, put the cart before the financial horse. We had a question kind of going right kind of off of that, which is how do you decide between putting money in a high interest savings account, stocks, or a mutual fund? And also like maybe explain all of those things for starters.
Yeah, first off, so high interest savings account basically goes along of the Federal Reserve. They set an interest rate. And so typically, like over the past few months, we've kind of seen some lower interest rates. And so that's why more and more people have been looking towards investing. When you think about it, a lot of these interest rates are below 2%. So if you think about the stock market receiving an average of 8 to 12% a year, it's something to also look forward to. And you can think of stocks as a little bit higher risk than mutual funds. Stocks are you're investing into individual companies rather than mutual funds, index funds, or ETFs when you're really buying almost a basket. Think of an Easter basket of stocks, and this helps with your diversification.
Awesome. And how do you think, if you want to invest in stocks, how do you think about which ones to be investing in?
It really depends on your personality. It depends on your goals as well too. For example, if I'm looking for something that has 5 to 10 year returns, I want to look at something that's a lot more secure versus maybe the tech sector, which is very volatile. It could be something more along the lines of less than a year. And so when you really think about it, it truly all depends on your personality, how much risk that you can take, how much diversification you want to uphold, and where you see yourself in 15, 20 years.
Awesome. Pulling up our questions. Okay, so we had an interesting question, which is what are penny stocks and should you be investing in them?
Penny stocks are anything kind of below $10. Some might say they're below $5, but you can think they're generally very, very cheap. You can buy a lot for a little. And penny stocks are one of the most volatile types of classes within the stock market. It's more or less lesser known companies that you'd be investing in. They tend to move quite a bit. There's also associations with things like pump and dumps. Many penny stocks are on the verge to bankruptcy. You can think of something like Hertz, which last year was a penny stock everybody was looking forward to. And of course, went down. AMC kind of take a look into going into a bankrupt company as well. It's okay, Sarah. We all learn. I always like to say, turn your past failures into your future successes. And so the whole point of this conversation and living these experiences to make sure that you don't make them again. You don't fall into the same trap. But overall, penny stocks, they are something, again, if you can manage the risk, then it's all you. But if it's something that you're a first time investor, might not want to take a look at in the near future.
Awesome. Okay, so if you don't want to be like me and get your investing advice from Twitter, where do you go when you want to figure out which stocks you would want to consider investing in?
So this is a really interesting question because I come from social media, personal finance, fin talk, stock talk, that kind of thing. And so I like to use social media as financial awareness. Like, okay, I'm diving into this ocean. You don't know what you don't know. And I, of course, don't know how to swim. And so what most people do is they just take immediate advice from social media and they don't do their outside research. So this is where tangible physical books come in, or reputable sites or credible companies that come in, where you can actually ignite or activate that financial awareness that you've been creating. So all about finding the awareness, seeing you don't know what you don't know, and then next steps moving forward is actually taking action and following through.
Awesome. I think this kind of goes back to potentially our conversation about the tree and where you should be putting your money. But we had a question about how often you should be putting money into the stock market. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I like to automate my investments. I have such a busy lifestyle. So there's this concept, what's known as dollar cost averaging. Instead of putting like $10,000 immediately into a few stocks, you put in like $10 every week or $10 every day. In this way, you're kind of averaging out with the stock market. You're not potentially buying in at all-time highs. You're not potentially buying in at all-time lows. You're just kind of consistently following the lines of, hey, the stock market returns an average of 8 to 12%. So I'm just going to continue daily investing. And I personally love automating it.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that could be super helpful for a lot of people who are just trying to pass their classes, but also now want to invest in the stock market. Can you talk us through some of the tools that exist for investing, whether that's Robinhood, TD Ameritrade, or others?
Yeah, so it really depends again on your investing goals. For example, some brokerages don't offer things like 401ks or Roth IRAs. And so you have to consider if you want to use a brokerage for multiple things, such as an individual investment account, like you just want to start investing and just test the waters, but you also want to have a Roth IRA and make sure that you're getting a secure future for your retirement. And so start thinking about those things. I traditionally like going more of the older route of Fidelity, Charles Schwab, TD Ameritrade, but I understand the convenience of something like Robinhood or Public.
Awesome. And okay, how do you decide when to put money into something like an investment versus an emergency fund or a loan if, say, you made some extra money in any given month from somewhere? Where does it go first?
Tying it back to the money tree, it all depends on that central root. These roots are really what uphold that money tree. And so we never know what tomorrow is going to bring. We never know what even the second that I'm talking right now is going to bring. And so I personally would choose the emergency fund any day over investing if I had, the option of, hey, I made some more money, especially if I'm not like capped out within my emergency fund. I don't have that 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up, and I would really choose the emergency fund.
Awesome. And then this is my last question before we can jump in back into Q&A for everybody. What is the difference between putting money into a retirement account, like a Roth IRA, which is connected to the stock market, versus just like putting money into the stock market? Does that make sense?
This is a good question because when the Robinhood GameStop situation was happening, nobody understood that you have to pay taxes, especially within just a normal individual brokerage account. So the difference between a Roth and your individual brokerage account is taxes. Roths are tax advantaged, meaning you pay taxes now, you can take out that lump sum later in life. Unlike individual brokerages accounts where you have short-term capital tax gains and you have long-term capital tax gains. Short-term is really anything less than under a year. Long-term is anything over a year. So let's say you bought AMC today, you sold it tomorrow. That would be considered short-term because you held it for less than a year. If you bought AMC today, you sold it next year in 5 days, that would be considered long-term. And the key difference there is that when you're day trading or swing trading, or holding it less than under a year, it's going to be taxed a lot higher than long term.
Awesome. I think that was super helpful for people to know, myself included. Awesome. So I want to make sure we answer any other questions that are in the chat, and there are a bunch. Okay. Okay, Nikki says, I was told when we were young that we should be doing aggressive mutual funds, but I'm not entirely sure if that was good advice. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so mutual funds are actively managed. They're actually kind of going a little bit out of style compared to something along the lines of index funds or ETFs. Mutual funds return lower year over year compared to index funds, something that's like tracking the S&P 500. So I personally would go aggressive on index funds, a little bit less on the mutual funds.
Awesome. Nikki asked, what trading platforms would you recommend? I think that kind of goes back to the question about the Charles Schwab Fidelity versus Robinhood, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really just all depends on your goals. If you already have a Roth IRA set up somewhere else and you just want the convenience of some quick app like Robinhood or Public, go for it. But if you're, if you have a busy lifestyle, if you're already so cluttered all around, it would be a lot easier to hold all of your investments, or just use one financial provider, someone like Fidelity that provides a whole bunch of different financial instruments and tools that you can use.
Awesome. Mackenzie says, I don't know if I'm supposed to like read this acronym. What are SPACs? SPACs?
Yeah, SPACs.
Yeah.
SPACs are a little bit different. They kind of make the playing field a lot easier for just any retail investors compared to IPOs. This might be another conversation to have in a specific like stock market type investing chat. Overall, I personally like SPACs in comparison to IPOs. But yeah.
Okay, cool. Mackenzie, seems like we'll dive into that further later, but love the enthusiasm. Megan says, where do we keep our emergency fund? Is that something we should use a high yield savings account for, or just a normal savings account? Taylor, anybody, welcome to chime in.
Yeah, so I like to keep mine in both a high yield savings account along with a price link savings account. It's something that the US is kind of just getting into now, but the UK and almost all other places around the world have implemented it. So it's basically like a lottery system for saving money. You receive tickets. It's just a random draw. Once you get those tickets back, it's like literally playing the lottery. You can win money and it incentivizes you to save. So I split 50-50.
Cool. Okay, we have a question. How do you keep up regularly with financial information and tips? And do you have any platforms that you would recommend?
I always do it through TikTok. I have an email like newsletter that I subscribe to as well. Like I said, I think TikTok and social media in general is a really great platform to just have that awareness, that financial awareness. But it's always up to you to take that and activate it with something that's a little bit more stable, secure, has validity and credibility.
Awesome. And Ariel and Hannah, do you guys have any other suggestions on where you might turn to for financial advice or tips?
There are some good podcasts if you go into the Apple Store or wherever you get your podcasts and search money. If you search money tips, financial planning, there's a lot of good content there too. I personally love podcasts, so definitely can check that out too.
Awesome. Gwendolyn says, what are the, God, I freaking love this question. What are the best tips for managing impulse spending and best tips for keeping a budget? Hannah or Ariel, you guys covered this. Do you want to speak at all about this?
Yeah, Ariel, you can jump in too. I personally love to shop, and so I think this is a great question. One I heard recently on a podcast, and it really resonated with me, for impulse purchases, set a limit for yourself. And so if you typically spend like more than $50 on an impulse purchase, say anytime I'm hit with, like if I find something and it's more than $50, I'm going to spend a day or a few days thinking about it. And then if I'm still thinking about it, I'll come back to it. I personally need to start setting a week. because I still love to shop. But I think that was a helpful tip to kind of like make sure you're still really want it. You're not just buying it because it's on sale. And yeah, Ariel, do you have anything to add?
I would just add maybe two things. One, you know yourself, so you know what your spending behaviors are. So just be honest with yourself and figure out where you think you may veer off track or what your triggers might be. Use cash. I mean, maybe not in a pandemic because it's dirty, but I mean, cash, there's something emotional about spending cash. It feels more expensive. So, use your credit card, get those points, but maybe if there's a specific area that you want to scale back on, use cash, and it might make you have more informed decisions, or do a gift card. So if you're trying to scale back at Starbucks, on the first of the month, buy a $50 gift card to Starbucks, and once the Starbucks card is run through, you're done spending there. So just try and adopt some hacks that work for you based on your triggers.
I love that gift card idea. That's like so practical. And I think the cash thing is so right. I remember being like in elementary and middle school, right? You had like a $20 bill. You're like, this will last me my entire life. And now I'm like, oh, $20. Let me just swipe. It's dangerous. Okay, awesome. Well, if anyone has any last minute questions, the last 4 minutes, I want to make sure we answer them. I had some questions that I think might be helpful for others that I personally would like to ask. For the fixed expenses in the emergency fund, does that include wants or is that just needs?
Sorry, I double muted myself. I would say that's just your needs. You can have a little bit of a buffer for wants too, but really making sure that your needs are covered in the event of if you would lose your job or another pandemic, making sure that you can keep a roof over your head, the lights on, and food on the table.
Okay, awesome. And then Ariel, I know you might have mentioned this, but when someone checks your credit score, does that hurt your credit score?
It technically does. It's an inquiry. So there's soft inquiries and hard inquiries. Credit Karma is an example of a soft inquiry that won't impact your score. So if you are applying for something, I keep coming back to this landlord example, but if you're applying for an apartment and they say, we're going to run your credit, just FYI, ask, is it a hard credit? Is it a hard inquiry or a soft inquiry? The hard inquiry is going to stay on your credit report for 2 years. And if you have multiple hard inquiries, it'll start to drag your score down.
Awesome. That is good to know as I plan my move to New York. And then can you lower the interest rate on a credit card? Like if you're like doing well?
I love this question because that is such a good, informed consumer question. If you have a wonderful track record, if you've made all your payments, like anything else in life, call and negotiate and say, what options are available for me? I mean, especially if you got the card as your first credit card, they probably assigned a pretty exorbitant interest rate. So it's reasonable for you to call and see what wiggle room may exist, and the right company will work with you. It's definitely not unheard of for them to lower the rate if you've been responsible.
Okay, that would be my Apple Card. I think I have the highest interest rate possible. And then if you have multiple credit cards, should you just spread out using them? Or can you just use one all the time?
You can have one be your primary. Oh, sorry, Hannah.
No, I was just going to say it's also helpful to understand the benefits from each card. So if one is really good points for Ubers, maybe you link your Uber account to that credit card. But Ariel, jump in.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Going back to something Hannah said during her presentation, using one can be helpful for tracking spending. So if one is kind of your primary, that's a really helpful budgeting tactic, but you're going to want to pay attention to the benefits as Hannah outlined, and then also make sure that you are using the other ones at least once a quarter. I think it's a good practice. Many times companies will close cards that aren't utilized, and that will impact your score.
Got it. That's super good to know. And then we have one last question that I'd love to get in from Megan. She says, I love, in all caps, checking my credit score through the Bank of America app. Does my score go down every time I check?
No.
Thank God, Megan. We're totally fine. Okay, amazing. Well, that brings us to the end of the hour. I know I personally learned so much. It sounds like our audience learned a lot too. So I can't thank you all enough for joining us. And thank you to everyone who joined us live and tuned in. I hope this was so helpful and you got some of your questions answered. Like I said, our next event coming up in March is about managing relationships with coworkers and your managers. So definitely want to join that. And if you identify as female or femme non-binary and you're not already in our Slack community, I'm going to drop the membership link, so we want to see you there. Thank you again to all of our panelists. This was amazing, and I hope everyone has an amazing night. Thank you, guys.